what we're going to do, and I'd like you to include this in your video lecture booklet, so wherever there's a free spot on the next page, you're going to write properties of real numbers. Now, this is something I noted that some of you lack the background in this and didn't pick up on this in your the note-taking, so we're going to do a little special lesson on this. So what is the commutative property of real numbers? Well, it's that if you had a number A and you were going to add it to a number B, that if you added the B first and then the A, that's legal. So what does the commutative property do? It sort of reverses the order. And as you probably would imagine, this is the commutative property of addition. These are called add-ins, and you can arrange them and reverse them, and the answer is still the same. Now our next property, and we'll write this out together, is the associative property. Now here we have items A plus B plus C, and this side A plus B plus C, and you'll notice they are in the same order. But in the associative property, we say we can join these first two, putting them in parentheses like so, and then add the third, or we could associate these two first, adding them, and then add the first, and the results are the same. This is the associative property, and as you can see, it's of addition. Now, multiplication, it would be A times B times C equals A times B times C. And again, they're identical order. But we're saying you can multiply these two first, then multiply it by the third, or multiply the last two first, and then multiply it by the first, and the answers are the same. So this is the associative property of multiplication. Now another famous one is the distributive property. And it looks like this. Give you a moment. Distributive property. Here we have A, and then in parentheses, B plus C. Well, we can distribute that A through multiplication, and then that gives you A times B, and then A times the C, which will give you plus AC. So this is something we'll be using later in the course, and you want to know these properties, or at least be familiar with them, and then having them in your notes, every once in a while you glance at them and review them, because they'll be using these vocabulary words: the commutative property, the associative property, the distributive property. Now, one that I like to include here is when we see the distributive property going from left to right, what do you call going from right to left to get from this stage back to this stage? And we'll be using this in Chapter 2, or our book, Chapter 5, where we do equations. We want to take the A, that's a common factor out of each term here, How do we do that? And the answer is we factor it out. So factoring out the common a from each term, it looks like what we have here originally. All right, we're now going to take a look at what is called the identity property. And is basically, if we have a term, whatever it happens to be, and we add a 0 to it, we just end up with the same term. So this is referred to as the identity property of addition. What can you add to anything and not change its value? And the answer is 0. Now we also have an identity property of multiplication. What can we multiply anything by and not change its value? And the answer is 1. You could multiply anything by 1, and it's the same value. So this is called the identity property of multiplication. Now you might recall from our previous lessons, we use this a lot to make equivalent fractions. And just a quick review of that would be if we had 1/2 and we wanted to make that 1/2 into an equivalent fraction that had, let's say, a denominator of 8, how would we do that? And the answer would be you would multiply 1/2 by a 1 that would make the denominator an 8. And we said the other day there was an infinite number of forms of 1. Which form of 1 would you choose here to make a denominator of 8? And the answer we said was 4/4, which is a 1. But now 1 times 4 is 4, and 2 times 4 is 8. All right, another property that we often think of is called the inverse property, and we'll write that down. And what is the additive inverse? Well, if we had a letter or a value a, in order to get it to equal to 0, we'd have to add its additive inverse. And that would be the opposite sign of that value. So a plus a negative a is 0. So if you had here a -2 plus its additive inverse, in this case would be 2, that would equal 0. And we also have what is called the multiplicative inverse. That'll be our last one for today. Now, the multiplicative inverse, or sometimes referred to as the reciprocal of something, is if you have a term a, and you want to get that to be equal to a 1, what do you multiply it by? Well, remember, every number is over 1, and if we take it in this form and flip it, we get 1 over a, and the second item here is the reciprocal of this. The end result is 1. So multiplying any number by its multiplicative inverse, which is its reciprocal, you end up with a positive 1. Now, again, you'll be using examples of these throughout your work in mathematics. In this course, any mathematical course you take, these are the properties of real numbers and should be part of your vocabulary.